Well, hello there, my little yarn goblins and fiber trolls. Welcome back to another episode of At the Table. My name is Christopher. I am Flannel and Pearls, and if this is your first time here, I want to thank you. I want to thank you and I want to welcome you in. Please feel free to join us. Take a seat. There's one waiting for you right here, right at the old table. If you're not familiar, this is a space for friends. This is a space where we all agree that what we're going to do is we're going to turn down the energy on the world just a little bit. We're going to turn the volume down. And we're going to make a little pact that what we're going to do for a little while is we're just going to focus on ourselves. We're going to agree to just put energy into ourselves, to pour into our own cup, to fill it up. So we have the ability to be the best version of ourselves, which, especially for this time of year, so difficult. It seems like as I get older, as the years pass by, the holidays, they just become more and more chaotic. The lists, they just continue to grow. It seems endless. The question of whether or not I'll actually get it all done is anyone's guess. But what I do know is that I try my absolute best, which is not always the same thing as the best that I am capable of. And around the holidays, that's very hard to remember. And furthermore, it's even harder to accept that the best that you are capable of, not always the same as the best that you can do with the circumstances you've got. And the holidays, they really pull it out of you, don't they? Those are some circumstances. So what this is this is just a time for all of us to just sit down, turn the radio off, and just relax. A lot of times what we do together is we do a little bit of crafting. I myself am going to knit because that's what I like to do. And right now I'm working on a sweater that I would love to have finished by Christmas. Maybe I'll get it done. But you don't have to do that. Just because I'm going to knit doesn't mean that you have to. I've had people spin fiber. I've had crocheters, cross-stitchers, embroidery artists, embroiderers, embroideryists. I'm not sure, but I've had them. Needlepoint. I've had people who do needlepoint. We've had watercolorists, woodworkers who are whittling on beautiful works of art. We've got crafters of all sorts. You're welcome to sit here for as long as you'd like. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to get my project ready. I'm just working on a sweater. I've got it right over here. As always, I'm going to play a little bit of soft music. So feel free to pause the video now if you'd like. Gather up your stuff. If you've got a whip that is in process right now and you want to put some work into that, I would love that. Maybe you want to start a new project. You'd be welcome to do that too. That's always very exciting, getting a new project up off the ground, especially right now during the autumn, almost winter. Winter is just around the corner, so that would be fun as well. But feel free to pause, gather your stuff, and meet us back here at the table whenever you're ready. We'll be waiting. Noisy. After a long sleep, my Awen sweater is finally back out of hibernation. I ran out of steam. That's all it came down to is I ran out of steam, and it was the strain of having a long project, I think, is what did it in for me. It wasn't the cables. It's not the pattern. Pattern's beautiful. It's very easy to follow. Megan Babin did a wonderful job. For those of you who may not be familiar, Megan Babin is one of the designers for Hudson & West, and she has a long series of beautiful, beautiful sweaters and hats. This one is the Awen sweater. I am making it out of Estelle Yarns, Eco Shetland worsted in the color Pine. And I am just about done with the back piece now. I've moved on to the decreases, and so that's what I'm going to be working on today. It's a beautiful pattern, absolutely fantastic. I've really enjoyed it, but there was something about just a long project like this that my brain just could not wrap around. Couldn't do it. So I decided to give myself a little bit of a break. I made some mittens, I made some socks. I have a new arm. I decided to try this to see if it gave me the ability to knit a little bit easier while talking to you, because having the microphone on the table, I kept smacking it, and I didn't want to do that. Yeah, I think I'll just set that right there. If you celebrate Halloween, I hope that it was a fun one. We had a really easy one here. Nice and simple, nothing too complicated. Of course, it was so much fun with Howl. For those of you who follow me on Instagram, you are probably familiar with who Howl is at this point. Howl is the little black porch cat that we have who adopted us back in July. And obviously, being a black cat, obviously Halloween was made for her. And so we had a good time just hanging out with her outside, had a little bonfire in our backyard. But now, November is here. November has come and gone so quickly. Thanksgiving is over. All of the leaves have fallen off the trees for the most part. I think the only one that's left is just the Japanese maple out front, which is this extraordinary, bright, fiery red. Just beautiful. And so it's all of these barren trees surrounding this one flaming Japanese maple right there in the front yard. A little dramatic. If you are in the United States, I hope you had an amazing Thanksgiving. I hope it was nice and relaxing, easy and uncomplicated. I know that Thanksgiving for so many people can be an incredibly stressful experience, a very overwhelming holiday, particularly if you host, which is exactly what we chose to do this year. We had my partner's parents in from Wisconsin, and it was the first time that I have hosted Thanksgiving since, gosh, I had to have been in my 20s, my very first apartment. I have willfully avoided hosting Thanksgiving since then. But it was fantastic. It was a wonderful time. I would do it again. Maybe. Maybe. There we go. You'll have to forgive my radio silence. There is a middle panel to the cable, which I'll show you in just a second, but there's a middle panel to the cable. Oh, it is where all of the magic happens, and it is the least repetitive. It has 32 rows to it, and so it repeats the least number of times in the panel, and so I always have to pay the absolute most attention to it. Everything else I have locked away in my brain, but that one, as soon as I start on it, I'm just like, I just have to hone in. No way around that. But we had all of the best, all of this. I always believe that around the holidays, your Christmas dinners, your Thanksgiving dinners, what you should do is you should play the hits. You should do all of the stuff that everybody expects. Sure, you can have maybe like one or two little experimental fun dishes, but those should be nothing of any, great importance. If it's something that everybody expects and loves, you should just simply make them in a traditional fashion so that everybody can, get the thing, right? The thing that they think about when they think about the holiday meal. And so we had all of those delicious traditional items, the sage and onion stuffing, roasted turkey. I am a big fan of broiled Brussels sprouts. Big fan, so we always make a bunch of those. We are a fresh cranberry sauce household as well. I grew up on the canned stuff. I grew up on the jellied stuff, but myself, once I got older, I started cooking. I realized how beautiful and rich and flavorful Oh, fresh cranberry sauce can be so incredibly uh, potent. That doesn't seem like the right word, but it can just, it brings something so bright. That's what it is. It's brightness. It's such a bright flavor, which for a table that oftentimes is sort of dominated by rich, heavy, fatty stuff, it's wonderful to have something crisp and bright and sharp to help sort of cut through all of that. And I just love it. As a kid, it was my favorite. The jellied stuff was my absolute favorite part of whatever was on the table. Didn't matter. Could not be less interested. What I wanted was that jellied cranberry sauce. And so I would just eat it by the spoonful. I really would I just have a can and just oh, it would make my mom so mad. She'd find out that I got into it and they'd have to go get another can. Sorry, Mom. But I also made a very traditional apple pie for dessert. I was just in a mood. Usually I make sweet potato pie, but in lieu of a sweet potato pie this year, I decided to opt for a sweet potato casserole, which is absolutely delicious if you've never had one. I really, really enjoyed it. It's just almost like a custard of sorts made out of sweet potato. It's just pureed sweet potato with a bit of dairy in it. The choice of that is entirely up to you. You could use non-dairy milk, but it's just a little bit of dairy, some eggs, spices, and then it's topped with a sort of like oaty, nutty crumble on top. And that gave me all the sweet potato fix that I needed. It's usually served as a side, but between you and I think that it was a bit more of a dessert. So I made an apple pie instead, which was just delicious. It was absolutely wonderful. I love apple pies. For those of you who have been here for the past episodes, you know how I feel about apples, which is very pro. But I hope that your holiday was wonderful. If you celebrate, I hope that it was just filled with love and warmth. I hope that you got to spend it with friends and family. And I hope that it was everything that you needed it to be and none of the stress that it can hold. That's always the goal, a nice stress-free Thanksgiving. Oh, I'm sorry. I told you I was going to show you what that middle panel looked like. It's this one right here, right down here. As you can see, it's a little intense, right? It's a little bit intense, and so I have to be very careful about it, and I have to hone in and focus on it. Now that Thanksgiving is over, it is full on Christmas at this house. I know that there are some people who like to just kind of like leapfrog right over Thanksgiving. They like to go straight from Halloween to Christmas. Thanksgiving is just kind of like it's like a pit stop on the way to Christmas. It's like, oh, we get to have Halloween and then it's Christmas. A little break for Thanksgiving, and now it's Christmas again, all the way until the new year. And I have a lot of friends like that. I do. And some of you are watching. Hello. And I love it. While I myself in this house, we like to give every holiday its fair shake. October is for Halloween, November is for Thanksgiving, December is for Christmas. I love that some people just like to jump right into the things that make them happy. I love that. It's sort of become, I think, trendy to make fun of these people and, I don't know, make them feel bad for doing something that makes them happy and ultimately doesn't harm anybody else. But here in this house, I support it. I think it's great. But now that the time has come, it is full on Christmas. We got our tree out. We had the flue checked on the fireplace. We moved into this place in June, and so we've not had any reason to use the fireplace yet. It's an old wood-burning fireplace, and obviously we didn't want to use it without knowing, can this thing even, can it do it? So we had it checked. And we're just sort of settling back into the soft gentleness of the winter. And this time of year, it's always it's kind of melancholy, isn't it? There's a melancholic nature to it. And I don't necessarily mean a sorrowful one. I don't mean a sad melancholy. It's just, I don't know, like the trees are bare, the days are shorter, the streets are littered with leaves. There's a lot more gray skies than there used to be. And there's just, the end of the year is coming. And it's sort of a reminder that one has gone by. And there's just, I don't know. It always just makes me think about the passage of time. And what it really reminds me of is one of my favorite stories, which is The Goose That Tried to Keep Summer. I don't know if you're familiar with this or not, but The Goose That Tried to Keep Summer is about this old goose who lives alongside a lake with his family. And he's done so many years of migration that his body is just tired of it. He loves the summer. He loves the warmth of the sun. He loves spending it flying around with his grandchildren. And the idea of having to fly south again for another year, it breaks him. And so he devises a plan. He hatches a plan, if you will, to keep summer. He decides that if winter doesn't come, that means that he doesn't have to fly south. So, if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to share that story with you. This is the goose who tried to keep summer. Long ago, in a land not far from here, there was an old goose who lived at the edge of a shimmering lake, nestled in a clearing deep in the great forest. Sheltered from the outside world and protected by the long, strong arms of the countless trees that surrounded them, the goose and his family lived happily. Their days were filled with lazy paddling through the lake's cold, spring-fed water and laying in the warm sun along the many creeks and streams that stretched out from its shores like pumpkin vines. Here, in the grasses filled with wildflowers, they would chat with their friends the beavers, who lived on the opposite shore. "The shadows are growing longer every day, aren't they?" Papa Beaver asked Grandfather Goose, pulling a plate of shortbread biscuits from his knapsack. "Yes," Grandfather Goose replied as he looked upward, using his wing to shield his squinting eyes. "But I think we have a bit still before the winter settles in." He sat back on the grass, dandelions tickling the tangerine orange soles of his webbed feet, the sun resting warm and gentle like a thick quilt over his gray feathers. "Won't be long before I see you overhead calling for everybody to settle in," Papa Beaver said through a mouthful of biscuits. You see, Grandfather Goose was no ordinary goose. Each autumn, he was responsible for flying over the great forest and announcing winter's arrival. Like a golden trumpet, his magnificent call could pierce even the thickest wall of trees, beckoning his family to join him in their annual flight south for the winter. For weeks he circled, tracing the creeks and streams as he flew, a herald of the changing season. Soon thereafter, he would take his place at the front of their chevron flight, leading them south for safekeeping. Rightfully, he thought of himself as very important. For over 20 years, it had been his job to ensure every goose made their way south before the first winter freeze, a task he took seriously, even if he didn't understand why. You see, geese always leave before the first deep chill, far in advance of Jack Frost and his team of winter sprites working their magic on the great forest in their beloved lakeside home. Though he grew up hearing tales of the winter's bitter cold, of water so hard it had to be walked across instead of swam, and geese wandering through feet of snow searching for a single frozen berry to eat, he had never seen it. Like all geese, Grandfather was a child of the summer, born to revel in the sun's warmth and beauty. In his youth, he spent his days under the wing of his own grandfather, learning the path south and training his magnificent call. Together, they would spread their wings wide to capture every ray the sun sent down to warm them, casting playful shadows on the earth below. Nothing made Grandfather Goose happier than a summer along the lake. But as each year passed, he grew to resent the cold sting of autumn's arrival. Always a melancholy flight, leaving behind their lakeside home for the winter, these last several years had been particularly bitter for Grandfather Goose. It seemed even his wings rejected the idea of flying away. They tired so quickly, worn from years of migration. Time, it seemed, was catching up to the old goose. "I bet you can't wait to get south and warm those feathers," Papa Beaver said, interrupting Grandfather's thoughts. "Yes," Grandfather Goose mumbled, suddenly very aware of how stiff his joints felt. "I suppose that time is coming soon enough." Just then, the robin flew in to rest on the brambleberry bush behind Papa Beaver, fluffing his feathers a bit more than necessary and puffing out his red chest to catch the last glowing rays of afternoon sun. He cleared his throat loudly. "I'm so grateful I don't need to migrate south for the winter," he sang. "Last winter I stayed here at the lake for the entire season. Everybody talks about how awful the winters are at the Great Forest, but I found it to be rather mild." Grandfather Goose looked up at the robin. "Mild?" he asked. "Oh, yes," the robin cried. "Absolutely wonderful. The lake was chilly, sure, but I had no problem bathing in it. Refreshing, really. And the real surprise is how different the roots and seeds taste as they age through the winter." Grandfather Goose couldn't believe what he'd just heard. Eating? In the dead of winter?" he stammered. "Well, I didn't starve to death, did I?" The robin laughed as it flew off. Craning his neck to look back, he shouted, "Have fun heading south this winter. Be sure to write." Grandfather Goose and Papa Beaver sat in stunned silence for a moment, watching as the robin shrank to the size of a sunflower seed in the cloudless ocean of blue above them. "Tuh!" scoffed Papa Beaver. "That robin is as foolish as the day he was born." He stood up, brushed biscuit crumbs off of his shiny fur, and collected his knapsack. "Don't go listening to him, Grandfather Goose. The winters are much worse than he's making out." "Are they?" Grandfather asked. "Have you seen them?" "Well," Papa Beaver said, his gaze dropping to his feet as if they were of sudden great importance. "No. We spend all of our winters in our den over there." He gestured to the beaver's beautiful dam crafted with extraordinary care from sticks and boughs they had been collecting all summer long. "We store what we need until spring, so we never have any reason to come out." Grandfather Goose's brow furrowed in doubtful thought. "But," the beaver cried. "My papa once told me about my great-great-granddaddy who got caught outside in the great blizzard all those years ago, and he nearly froze to death." He shuddered at the thought. "So don't you go trying to stay." Papa Beaver pulled his knapsack up over his shoulders and waved farewell as he turned to waddle back to his den, leaving Grandfather Goose to sit with his thoughts as the sun slowly dipped below the horizon. Choosing to walk instead of fly, Grandfather Goose took the long way home, giving him plenty of time to consider what had happened that afternoon. What if, he thought, the winter only comes because I say it must? The idea flew circles around his head, tracing an arc from his right temple to the left. The leaves don't change until I call. The lake doesn't freeze either. I've never seen a frost before we take flight, and the beavers have told me that they always wait to watch us fly overhead before turning in for the winter. Grandfather Goose's mind was on fire. For decades, he had followed his grandfather's instruction, waiting for the earliest leaves to shift from green to golden before taking to the skies, announcing the end of the season. What if, he wondered, summer never left? He stopped walking, his bright orange boots speckled with mud from the damp creek bed. What if I could keep summer? "Yes, of course," he said out loud. "If I don't call for winter to come, it won't know that it's time." His heart thumped inside his chest as the prospect of year-long summers by the lake made his feet tingle. "I know what to do," he cried as he leapt into flight, his massive wings blowing a great cloud of dandelion seeds into the air as he shot upward. Flying faster than he had in years, Grandfather Goose could hardly contain himself as he crossed the water, calling to his wife as he flew. Landing on the lakeshore, Grandfather could see just the top of Grandmother Goose's bonnet waving from side to side as she waddled through the cattails, her deep grunts and annoyed murmurs lost in the thick stalks of grass. "What is it?" she cried, bursting onto the lakeshore, her white wings glowing in the early evening moon. "It isn't the passing of the seasons that brings the cold," Grandfather Goose nearly shouted. "It's us." "Us?" Grandmother asked, head cocked to one side in confusion. "What the blazes are you talking about?" No, listen to me," Grandfather said, panting from his record-setting flight home. "Each year we leave the lake, yes?" "Yes." "Right after, the cold comes, and with it, winter brings its ice and its snow. The lake freezes over, and the seeds and the fruits are all gone. Anything still around either sleeps for the season or it dies trying to survive." Yes, dear," Grandmother huffed. "I've heard the stories, too. That's why we always fly south." "No, but that's it," Grandfather cried. The promise of those warm, youthful summers of his past so close to his grasp. No more long, tiring flights south to escape the cold. What would happen if we didn't? How could the seasons change if we stayed? Grandmother crossed her wings. She stared at her husband, his feathers muddy and fluffed all akimbo, matching the excited look in his eyes. "What are you on about?" was all she could manage. "The cold!" Grandfather yelped. "When we fly south, the cold, bitter air from the north moves with us. Have you never noticed how cold the wind to our backs is when we leave? The chill on your toes?" Grandmother's brow furrowed as she clenched her jaw, refusing to answer. But even she had to admit her feet were usually the first thing to go each time they left in the fall. "It's because the winter grabs hold of our feet and catches a free ride south." Grandfather could hardly contain himself. "We're the reason that the lake freezes. If we stay, the winter must live out its season up north where it belongs, and we can stay here. Imagine a whole year of warm water here at the lake, here where we belong." There was a long silence between the geese. Grandmother could tell that Grandfather had made up his mind, but there was no way they could possibly keep the winter at bay simply by choosing to dig their feet into the lakeshore and refusing to give up the summer. It just doesn't work that way. She knew this to be true, even if she, like grandfather, had never seen a winter herself. Just as grandmother lifted up her wing to guide her husband home, the pair heard a rustling in the cattails. There, just a few feet away, came a small gosling. Little Goose, grandfather's eldest grandchild. "Grandpa," her little voice cooed, "does this mean you won't show me the way south this year?" The little one had heard her grandfather shouting and had come to see what all the commotion was. Unable to sleep from the excitement, she had taken to spending long hours every night sitting up in bed, retracing the lessons grandfather had been teaching her all summer long. How to lead the wedge to the South's warm safety, the correct call, announcing winter's arrival. If grandfather wasn't leaving this year, and winter should stay in its bed, does that mean their lessons were over? "Of course he's coming with us, sweetie," grandmother said as she wrapped her wing around the young goose's shoulders. "You'll get your chance to fly with him in just a few short weeks. Don't worry." Grandfather watched as the pair disappeared back into the tall grass, the cattails waving in the moonlight, betraying their path as they headed back inside. But he was not deterred. He was going to keep summer all year long and spend it on the water with his family. "Little Goose will understand," he said. "We can still fly together. We'll fly even more." Grandfather smiled as he imagined giving his granddaughter the gift of endless summers, the days that they'll spend together circling the great forest, how she will never know the sting of winter biting at her toes or the long, grueling flight south. Her wings will never grow tired and old. "She'll understand," he said, "and she'll be grateful for it." The weeks passed, and the shadows grew longer. Grandfather watched as the beavers worked long hours every day, bringing food into their den. They waved across the lake at one another, knowing that it would soon be months before they met again. Grandfather chuckled to himself. "Oh, Papa Beaver will be so surprised when I tell him that winter never came." But the great forest sat in agitated confusion, waiting for Grandfather to call. The dandelions, resting low in their homes along the creek bed, craned their faces to the sky, waiting for the geese to fly above. Each year, they released a flock of cotton-topped seeds to fly alongside the birds, going as far as the geese's wings could carry them. For miles, the seeds would drop to the unfamiliar fields below, bringing with them crops of new dandelions for next year. They knew they mustn't wait too long, so they listened, but never once heard Grandfather's call. Puff, puff, whir. Off they sent their winged seeds, a cloud of hazy angel hair, into the darkening gray sky of autumn, without the geese to guide them. The lake called and called for Grandfather. Every fall she waited for him to fly overhead, his silver gray feathers glistening in the angled amber sunlight. This was her sign to knit her winter blanket, for she knew that no other birds remained to drink from her waters. She mustn't wait too long, though. Between her shores were the fish, the water spiders, the frogs, the toads, and beavers who needed shelter all winter long, and only she knew the name and face of every creature who called her waters home. And she cared for them as if they were her own. Soon, she forgot about Grandfather's call and stopped waiting for his shadow to pass overhead. A sheet of ice passed over the lake, crossing from shore to shore and running down the veins of her creeks and streams, disappearing into the great forest until spring's warmth would breathe life back into her again. "This is ridiculous," cried Grandmother. Look around us. Look at the world beginning to freeze." Grandfather furrowed his brow. "This is just a bit of an autumn chill, dear. It will soon thaw when winter realizes that it has no horse to pull its buggy this year." "Fool!" shouted Grandmother. "Please, we must leave or we will all starve." Grandfather, lost in the memory of summer and the warm embrace of its sun, could not hear her. He sat, warming his aching wings on the fire as the leaves fell and gathered on the lake's frozen surface outside his window. "Fine," Grandmother huffed. "We'll be leaving without you. I've flown this path 1,000,000 times at your side, and between me and Little Goose, we will get everyone to safety." She began to pack her bag, leaving Grandfather alone with his thoughts. And as soon as Grandmother was gone, a small beak peeked around the corner. Little Goose, always the skilled eavesdropper, once again heard every word of her grandparents' conversation. "Are you really not coming with us, Grandfather?" she asked. Grandfather turned to see tears caught in the corners of his Grand Gosling's eyes. They looked at one another in silence, Grandfather searching the little one's face. "When I was young," he said, "just like you are now, I sat in this very room with my grandfather. It was he who taught me to fly, to call to the others, and to welcome the season's change, and to fear the winter's bite. For years we flew the path together." Grandfather pulled Little Goose up onto his lap, holding her close as he turned back to the window, staring at the frozen lake. Him on my right as we called to the gander together, leading them south, frost biting at our tails as we flew. But soon he lost his speed, and I was left at the front on my own, far younger than I should have, too soon to feel safe and certain that I knew what I was doing. Grandfather smiled, but he said I was strong and that I was smart. My call was clear and bold, and I had nothing to be afraid of. That he would be in the back, making sure that no one was left behind. Little Goose watched as her grandfather's eyes darkened and his smile faded. That was the last summer I spent with him. We didn't notice until landing south that he hadn't made it with us. Grandfather looked down at his little one, her wide eyes shining up. "But this year, I'll be able to keep summer forever, and we won't have to give up the sun. Nothing has to change. It can stay beautiful." Little Goose wrapped her wings around Grandfather, and the two hugged while the leaves fell outside. With tears running down her beak, she buried her face deep into the down of her grandfather's chest. In that moment, she felt fear wrap itself around her heart. If change caused her grandfather this much pain, she would hate it too. The two sat in silence, their feathers weaving a blanket of warmth around one another until Grandmother Goose came rushing into the room, a bag in tow. "Come now, little one," she said, urgency in her voice. "We need to leave now before the cold. We need to call to the others immediately and take to the skies before it is too late." Little Goose pulled away from Grandfather's chest and studied his face, as if committing it to memory. "Come on, now," Grandmother said, reaching out with her wing. She looked to Grandfather. "We will see you soon." And with that, they left. Their calls echoing over the lake, cutting through the barren trees as they flew, beckoning the rest of the geese to join them. Grandfather could hear as Grandmother and Little Goose were joined by the others, a chorus of cries bidding the lake farewell and welcoming winter home. And home it came. Soon Grandfather found himself wearing a crown of snowflakes, his cloak embroidered with frost. He carried a huge icicle as his scepter, a lonely king in a frozen land. Everyone had waited for him. The dandelions bowed their head as winter settled in. The lake pulled a blanket of snow up to her chin as the beavers nestled warmly in their den. Icy winds blew through Grandfather's feathers, chilling his silvery coat to powder white. His throat was so stiff with cold that he could not call, his magnificent trumpet powerless against winter's biting sting. His orange boots froze stiff as the lakeshore turned to a hardened block of earth. He looked across the lake, finding it entirely unrecognizable without its ring of wild grasses. The gray sky was visible through the naked trees. "The winter came," Grandfather said through chattering teeth. "I could not keep the summer from passing or the sun from leaving me behind." He squinted his eyes to the cloudy sky above him. He cried, "Oh, little one, I'm afraid I've made a terrible mistake." A sob broke through his frozen throat. "What is going to happen to me?" His cry, echoing across the lake's pillowy white blanket, unable to be caught by the barren trees, traveled up to the skies above. It flew up and up, piercing the clouds where the sun heard a familiar voice. Surprised to hear Grandfather's call so late in the year, the sun bent down and pulled a small gap in the clouds. There she saw him, very near death, shivering in the cold on the lakeshore, alone. "My dear friend," she whispered, "why have you not left for the winter?" Grandfather, his face warmed by the sun's beam, looked up. "I thought that I could keep summer and stop time for just a little while." The sun smiled. "Grandfather Goose, no one can stop the passage of time or bend change to their will. Even I will one day bow to its call and accept that my season has ended." Grandfather stared in silence as he felt the ice melt from his wings. "Look at the trees," she said, her beam widening to shine on the branches above Grandfather. "Each year their branches bud and bloom into extraordinary blossom, filling the lake with perfume. But their petals slowly fade and fall, making room for the leaves to grow. And those leaves, in turn, have their season, knowing that their time to fall will also come." The sun smiled, looking over the barren branches that surrounded the lake. "But in falling, they make such a spectacle. They light the sky on fire with their colors and dance in the wind until the time comes for them to rest together in the damp earth where they will feed the soil that keeps their trees alive. They know that time will pass without them," she said, "and that change can be beautiful." Grandfather hung his head in sorrow, thinking that he may never see Little Goose again, that he had fallen behind the wedge and she unknowingly spent her last summer with him. His heart ached with the memory of landing in the South and realizing his grandfather was not with them. A sob escaped his throat as his beak touched the snow piled up around his body. "Come," said the sun. "It is time for you to go." The sun opened up the clouds further, basking Grandfather in a pool of warming light. His throat thawed and his joints softened. Soon he could stretch his wings wide open, and he gave a great cry that splintered the heavens. The sun looked down and called, "Go." With that, Grandfather leapt into the sky, the cold winter wind bracing his face and stinging his eyes. As he climbed higher and higher, he called to his family, hoping that they would hear him coming. "I couldn't stop the winter," he cried. "Please don't leave me behind." He flew as fast as the cold wind would let him, the gray skies pelting him with snow that slowly turned to rain. As he flew, the temperature slowly began to warm, and the landscape below him shifted from an icy white tundra to stretches of deep brown, speckled with pops of orange and red. His throat cried louder than ever as he felt himself rocketing south. And in the distance, a call echoed back. And what I love so much about that story, what really draws me to it and just sort of brings me back to read it every autumn, is the reminder that change can be beautiful. That there is a difference between scary and dangerous. I have to remind myself of this almost constantly, it seems, that when I'm faced with something that is unfamiliar, something that is difficult, something that is uncertain more than anything, something that doesn't have a certain end to it. I have to remind myself that there is a difference between scary and dangerous. And just like for the goose, flying south again, accepting the reality that time is passing, that things change, that things don't stay the same forever, and they shouldn't. That's scary, but it's not dangerous. And I love that story. It reminds me so much of how I felt as a kid. When I was a child, I had the hardest time accepting change. Like truly just anything that broke habits, anything that broke routines, it just threw me through an absolute loop. I would do everything that I could in order to keep order and minimize disruption as much as possible, particularly when it came to holiday traditions. I remember when I was in my teens, my parents decided, I almost said they decided without asking me, as if they needed to ask me. I mean, I remember that they decided one year that they were going to change out the Christmas tree. We had moved from a very small house, the house that I grew up in as a kid. We had moved from that house into a much larger house, the one that they still live in today. And they decided, well, naturally, we're in this larger house now. What that means is that we need a more proportional Christmas tree, which as an adult absolutely makes sense. Like now that I look back on it, it's like, yeah, of course. That tiny little tree that they had when we lived in the little house, it would have looked absolutely absurd in this much larger living room. But they got a different tree with all different decorations. And all of the sudden, Christmas looked very different. And it wasn't enough that we were in a new house and that, I was having a different, trip to school, even though they were all my same friends and everything to that nature is, nothing was the same. And this one hinge pin, this one thing around which my whole year revolved, the biggest piece of iconography for it disappeared. That was a really hard change to stomach. Now, obviously, they used that for several years. That Christmas tree remained for a very long time, and it was beautiful. It was a beautiful tree, and I came to love it. And it's just a great reminder that change, no matter how uncertain it is, no matter how much it might frighten us, it can be beautiful. And I think this is going to be my last row. I'm going to do one more, and then I think I'm going to be done for the day. Wherever you are in the world, I hope that you've had a wonderful day. Or if it's evening, I hope that it's been a good night. Or if you are just now starting your morning, take it easy. Take it easy today. Have a wonderfully relaxing, calm day. Don't put too much on your plate. Spend it doing things that bring you joy and bring a small amount of, magic into your life. I think that we as adults are absolutely starved for whimsy and for magic. And I encourage you to take every opportunity you can, even if you have to create it yourself, to bring a little bit of that fun and that magic. Bring it back from your childhood. I think that's what I'm going to worry about today too. That's a good task for me. I'm already thinking about what it is that I can do. I think I'm going to put together a puzzle. That's what I'm going to do. Maybe not the most magical thing in the world, but that is playtime to me. I got one for Christmas last year that is a whole bunch of kittens. And I do like any reason to look at kittens, so I'll take it. All right, I am just about done for the day. Just a few more stitches here and a decrease. I'm shaping the underarm and the shoulders of the back piece. All right. Oh, it's turning out so well. I'm so tickled. It really does look great. Can I give you one more? Can I give you one more look at it? Can I show off just a little bit? Just a bit. Again, this is the Awen sweater. This is from Hudson and West. It's by Megan Babin. I'll include a link to all of that below in the caption itself. The yarn I'm using is from Estelle Yarns. It is the Eco Shetland worsted. The color is pine. And I was kindly gifted this wonderful sweater quantity of wool from Your Next Knit. All of that is going to be down below, including a coupon code that you can use. I'm not going to get any kickback on that. It's not an affiliate link. It's just a gift to you from me and from my friends at Your Next Knit. So if you're interested in giving this a try, feel free to give that a go. We'll get you 15% off your order. So, well, I am done for the day. I'm going to take a break. I think I might even get started on that puzzle. But just because I'm done doesn't mean that you have to be. I want you to keep on going for as long as it makes you happy, as long as you are comfortable. All right? I want to thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you for coming into the space. Thank you for taking a seat at the table. I understand that that was a decision that you made. That was something that you decided to do for yourself. And I want to thank you. Thanks for spending time with me. It means a lot. This is an international crafting circle. We have friends all over the world, people in every hemisphere. They're all here. I get comments from everywhere that you could imagine. And by sitting down and being a part of this, you're a part of that circle. We get to join together here at the table and spend a little bit of time together, shutting off the world, focusing on ourselves, building ourselves up, giving us that energy to go out into the world and be the best version of us. And I love that. I really do. It is. It's the gift that keeps on giving. So thank you so much for being a part of it. I really appreciate it. I want to remind you that any time you need a space like that, a space that is safe, a space that is quiet, that can take care of you, you will always have a seat at this table. As always, my name is Christopher. I am Flannel and Pearls, your local neighborhood knitting friend, and I'll see you next time. Thank you so much for spending time with me at the table today. If you would, please give this video a little like and hit the subscribe button on my channel. It seems silly, but it truly does help new creators like myself find and grow their audience. If you'd like to share your viewing experience on your own social media platforms, please tag me. I absolutely love seeing the stories of y'all watching and crafting along. You can find me on Instagram, TikTok, Substack, and Patreon at Flannel and Pearls. Huge thanks to my Patreon subscribers this month. Your support, it really means the world to me. To watch ad-free versions of my videos, access behind-the-scenes footage, exclusive playlists, and more, check out the link for my Patreon in the caption below. As always, take care of yourself, my friends. I'll see you next time.